Chapter 21. It turned out that crying himself to sleep at the ripe time of midnight had severe consequences on Tommy's appearance. As he peered into the bathroom mirror, an exhausted boy with bloodshot eyes and a red nose stared back. There were multiple other things wrong with him. Whenever he attempted to smile, it never reached his eyes, which housed a dull blue. To put it simply, he looked as pathetic as he felt. He tightened the green bandana around his neck and secured the latch on the Ronbu locket, preparing himself for breakfast before school started. It was going to be awkward. He had pissed off and snapped at 2 of the 3 other members of this household. He 100% deserved to be beaten to shit by Phil, even though the man would never raise a hand to a child, especially his own. I love you like you're my own son. He tugged at his hair. He had yearned for that adoration, that expression of unconditional love for years, centuries even. In every single life he had attempted and failed to fill his desire for a father, for someone to show him how a dad should act, as his first life instead displayed the opposite. He wanted to know what it meant to have a father figure that didn't neglect and kill the only person that stepped up to make sure he didn't die of hypothermia in the cold winter nights, and kissed him on the forehead before sleep took him. And he finally found that person. He found Phil. Yet, now that he had him, he didn't know what to do. The tattoo on his wrist did nothing but serve as a cruel reminder that, in a matter of days, he would lose the same person he had searched centuries for. It hurt. Stung more than it should. As he packed his bag, he put Henry inside as well. He needed a comfort item with him today. He walked down the stairs, slowly, dreading every step. He turned the corner, and all 3 of them sat already at the table. Techno was the only one who seemed happy to see him. "And the dramatic prick has woken up," Wilbur greeted. His tone wasn't as light-hearted as it normally was when the 2 made fun of each other. It was harsher, too real. "Are you done with your temper tantrum, or can I finish my bacon?" "So you're the only one allowed to be an immature little bitch and cry over your problems," Tommy snapped, mimicking Wilbur's tone, though with more edge. "I wouldn't call you unnecessarily shouting at Dad, crying over your problems," Wilbur hissed. "Have you suddenly forgotten that time you yelled at him in the garden after he was worried for your mental health? Because I sure haven't," Tommy quipped back. Wilbur glared at him, but didn't say anything back. He shrugged, his shoulders tense, and stabbed his bacon with his knife. Tommy's fists clenched under the table. His heart pounded. As much as he was prepared to turn a new leaf during this breakfast, if this was how Wilbur was acting, then the fucker deserved to be shouted at a bit more. Cutlery, scratching against the plates, echoed in the living room. Techno cleared his throat, interrupting the tense silence. "How was London?" "I stole a shopping cart and got banned for life from a tourist attraction," Tommy replied, his eyes still glued on Wilbur, who was practically seething as he stuffed his English breakfast into his mouth. "I didn't expect anything less," Techno said. He sounded too casual after witnessing the little bitch fest between him and Wilbur. But Techno always prided himself on being unbothered by everything. Surprisingly, the man's nonchalance made Tommy calmer. "Did you get any more tattoos then?" Tommy rolled up his sleeve to show the temporary tattoo he had. Since Tubbo and Ronbu had stolen all the cool tattoos, he was left with a stupid flower, a ranunculus butterfly. "That's nice." Techno nodded approvingly at him. Tommy guessed Techno liked the pink color. "We're just going to ignore the elephant in the room then, or..." Wilbur snarked. that annoying tone still in his voice. The more the breakfast went on, the more it dawned on Tommy that this was a 19-year-old who was currently acting younger than him. Phil, staying quiet, took another sip of his drink. He hadn't even acknowledged Tommy's existence this entire time. He wasn't quite sure if that was water in Phil's glass or straight vodka. "Oh yeah, thanks for the reminder," Techno said, and he faced Tommy. "My fencing tournament is later today." "Cool," Tommy commented. "Do you want me to help you get set up for the matches?" "It's almost as if you read my mind," Techno said, causing the corners of Tommy's mouth to upturn into a timid smile. He didn't know why Techno was doing this. The man usually stuck to few words and bullied Wilbur during breakfast meals, but he appreciated it nonetheless. It was his own fault, after all, that Wilbur and Phil were acting this way towards him, and he deserved it. Last night struck a bone with the two of them. "That's not what I meant, and you know it, Technoblade," Wilbur said with narrowed eyes. "Then what are you referring to?" Techno tilted his head, almost mocking Wilbur. "Because if you're talking about your idea of forcing a foster child with a history of problematic households to talk about why he may be acting a bit off today, then leave that to the side." Wilbur scowled and gazed down at his breakfast in shame. "We have to talk about your punishment at some point, Tommy." Phil finally spoke, although he didn't stare at Tommy as he did, almost as if he couldn't stomach the sight of him. "I think me driving him to school will be punishment enough," Techno said. "You taking me to school?" Tommy asked. "Yeah, I'm using Wilbur's car. He'll have to walk." "What the fuck?" Techno scoffed. "Perhaps with this time alone walking, you can think over why your ideas around Tommy are stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, poor you, he snapped at you last night, but boys, enough." Phil interjected, his hand rubbing the creases on his forehead. Tommy squirmed in his seat. He wasn't used to Techno defending him. "I would have thought that you'd listen to the only other person here who experienced foster care when something like this happens." Techno bit back. "Lay off the punishment for now. Techno, Phil." He interrupted. "He messed up, broke multiple house rules, and went against your word, but he also had a breakdown at midnight, and frankly, looks like a mess. Let him breathe for a bit." "I am right here," Tommy muttered, offended. Shut it. Both Techno and Phil said at the same time. Tommy held up his hands in mock surrender. "Let him come out with us later tonight and relax," Techno urged. "Fine." Phil caved into Techno's words, his head in his hands. "Fine, but he's grounded." "I am right in front of you," he exclaimed. "You're grounded," Phil repeated, facing Tommy this time. "Never mind, I'm not here." "You can eat the rest of your breakfast in the car," Techno said as he got up from his seat. "No eating in my car," Wilbur demanded. "You better start walking to school, Wilbur. You wouldn't want to be late." Techno taunted as he walked out of the house. Tommy grabbed a slice of toast and put it in his coat, following him to the car. "You are so fucking cool," Tommy gaped. "Winning arguments with Wilbur always ups my ego." And with that, Techno drove him to school, and managed to not hit anyone, unlike Wilbur. Though he did play weird music. It was a weird Minecraft parody of a Taylor Swift song that Techno knew word for word. Tommy made his way back from PE with a bruised ankle to the bench. He hated hockey with a burning passion. It was only fun when he was the one attacking people's legs, and not when it was the other way around. Plus, Daniel had a vendetta against him ever since he sprayed diluted hydrochloric acid over the fucker during chemistry a couple of months ago. So the entire lesson was a targeted attack. He sat down on the bench for break time, and waited for Ronbu to turn up. Tubbo was currently facing the consequences of almost causing a fire to happen in the science block. So his break time, for the next month, was spent with the chemistry teacher. Someone slammed a plastic folder onto the table with a loud smack, causing him to jump out of his seat. "Jeez, Ranbu!" he gasped. Ranbu laughed and took the seat next to him. "That's what you deserve for getting me grounded by my mom," Ranbu said. "Though she does like Michael, so thanks for giving him to me. I don't give a shit about your ugly pig son." Tommy stared at the stack of paper files inside the plastic folder. "What is this?" "This, my good friend, is a fact file I made on every single Greek tragedy mentioned on the Wikipedia pages and any Greek tragedy literature." Holy shit. He flicked through the pages, surprised at how much effort Ranbu put into this. "I would have included pictures, but my printing money has already skyrocketed because of this." Tommy was still gawking at it. "I will only say this once, Ranbu, but I appreciate you as a person, and you are an honorary Brit to me," Tommy said earnestly, a bright smile on his lips. He had never imagined that this would happen if he told someone about his curse, that they would go to this much effort just so he could be free. "Thank you, Tommy." Ranbu chuckled. "Now, I need you to tell me every single event that has happened in your life so I can do a process of elimination." "You're asking me to trauma dump on you in the middle of a break?" "Yep. Everything. Speed run telling me your tragic past." Tommy blinked at him. I don't know anything about my actual parents, but my major foster family exploited children and their son was abusive. They had him locked up half the time. I betrayed them by turning them into the police, and now I'm here with a new foster family." He paused. "I don't think you need to know about my other past lives, because this is pretty tame compared to that. You just admitted that you were in an abusive foster home and exploited at a young age." Ranbu deadpanned. "And you're saying this wasn't even the worst parts of your history?" "Dude, I've legit went through wars before." "Oh, yeah." Ranbu mumbled. Tommy flicked his forehead. Ranbu opened the plastic folder and spread out the pages. "I have one idea so far." He hovered over a file. "What if you're Paris?" Oui. "Not the capital of France, you idiot." Ranbu scoffed. He shoved the piece of paper in front of Tommy. "This guy." Tommy picked up the paper. "Paris of Troy, aka the douchebag who caused the Trojan War, all because he was a bit too horny. He was chosen by Zeus to pick out which goddess out of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite were the most beautiful. And of course, the horny fucker went with Aphrodite, as she promised him Helen of Troy in return. A married woman, with a husband prepared to go to war to get her back." "I don't see the similarities. I didn't cause any wars in this life," Tommy said. "I was more thinking of how you weren't raised by your biological parents, similar to Paris. His mother had a dream that he had some bad omen and would cause the fall of Troy, so he was raised by different people." "You calling me a bad omen?" "No, I'm saying your parents abandoned you," he stated, bluntly. "Well." Tommy huffed, stumped. "But what about the foster family thing? Was his new family dickheads as well?" "He was left for dead by his biological parents and nursed by bears, which may be a topical reference to how bad your fostering agency is." "I don't know," he said. "The whole causing a war thing seems pretty important in his myth, and I don't think I can cause a war in 9 days. Why 9 days? Tommy's stomach dropped. He forgot he didn't tell Ranbu the entire truth of his curse. That he didn't have until his eventual deathbed to figure out his myth, but instead had until his 16th birthday. He had to bullshit his way out of that. Wasn't Paris 16 when he caused the Trojan War? No, I don't think so, but it would make sense if he was a hormonal teenager when this happened. Nothing says sweet 16 like causing a Bronze Age conflict. Just look over these for me. Ranbu pushed the papers back into the folder, Do the process of elimination thing. Tommy glared at him. You're giving me homework. This is like therapy all over again. You either get reborn again, or have to read through my Greek mythology ramblings. Pick one. A tough choice. Ranbu sighed into his hand. The school bell sounded, and Tommy finished packing up the pieces of paper. Fine, I'll do your homework. See you at lunch. He had maths now, but at least Tubbo was in his class. He walked in and frowned at Miss Allingham, who stood at the head of the classroom. Ignoring all that, he sat down next to Tubbo and spread the Greek mythology folder back onto the table. What's that? Tubbo asked, as he completed his drawing on the back of his calculator with a Tip-X pen. Ranbu's making me do homework, Tommy said, which technically wasn't a lie. Tubbo narrowed his eyes, doubtful. You don't even do official homework. I'm a changed man. Debatable. Do you not accept change? Is this your Tory coming out story? Never say those words to me again. Miss Allingham interrupted the class before he could repeat himself. So, I'm covering for your maths teacher today as she's on maternity leave. But since it's your last maths lesson before Easter break, I thought it would be nice for you guys to do something other than maths in this lesson. Now, Tommy was suspicious of her. Miss Allingham would never allow having fun in a lesson. He guessed it was more because the woman couldn't do maths to save her life. So this was her way of copping out on teaching integration. Can we watch a movie? Someone suggested. Sure, we'll do a class poll. Do you still hate Miss, or is this easing your hatred for her? Tubbo whispered, as Miss wrote down movie titles on the board. Nope, I don't like her, regardless if we use a Netflix account or not. What about planes? Another person called out. Tommy thought nothing of the suggestion, even though it was the shit version of Cars. But Miss Allingham sure did, with how her eyes practically bugged out of their sockets. She immediately looked over at him with a face full of guilt. Tommy frowned at her. Why is Miss looking at you like she killed your family or something? Tubbo asked. The realization hit him. Phil had told her that his parents died in a plane crash during parents' evening. He covered his mouth with his hands to stop himself from laughing. She mouthed an apology to him. His face reddened. Let's not watch that one, she eventually said. Tommy, what film did you want to watch? Tommy grinned and let go of his mouth. Have you seen Moana? Not this shit again. Tubbo groaned and buried his face into his coat on the desk. Tommy came out of school happy that they watched Moana. Techno sat in the front of the car, with Nikki and Wilbur in the back. Tommy opened the door and joined him in the front. Is Wilbur not walking home? Tommy yelped as Wilbur kicked the back of his seat. I was tempted, but he promised to do my chores for me. Hi, Nikki, by the way. Tommy waved at her in the rearview mirror. She waved back and smiled, to Wilbur's dismay. Don't say hi to him, he's a prick. Wilbur grumbled. I'm sorry that you interrupted my cry fest last night by entering my room without my consent and got mad when I told you to leave. Tommy snarked, honesty slipping into him. He was done with Wilbur's shit. Thank you, Wilbur said. Wait, you're being sarcastic. Stop the car so I can boot Wilbur out of it. Wait until we're at a roundabout. Techno advised. Wilbur huffed from the back. You also yelled at Dad. I sometimes lash out at people who care about me when I'm having an existential crisis and want to self-sabotage the good life I have. Tommy spat, with an edge in his voice. Would you prefer an apology in writing an email, prick? Oh. We're approaching a roundabout if you still want to boot Wilbur. It's fine, Techno, Tommy said, and rested his head against the window. So this is why Wilbur was being a little whiny all day today? Nikki asked. Techno nodded and turned up the radio. Yep. When they got home, Tommy changed into casual clothes and entered the car again to set off on their journey for Techno's fencing tournament. And just like the beginning of breakfast, it was the most awkward shit. Wilbur was driving, with Nikki in the front, whilst Tommy sat in the back with Techno and Phil. What made it awkward, though, was how Techno had his headphones in, blasting some music titled Speedrunning. Tommy didn't get the reference, leaving him to deal with Phil. He should apologize to Phil. Like Wilbur said earlier, even if it was hypocritical, it was unnecessary for him to have shouted at him last night. But maybe isolating himself from these people would make his departure hurt less for them. No, he can't think like this. Not after today. Ranbu made a whole fucking fact file stacked with Greek myths and tragedies. If he went through them all, there was a chance he'd figure out his myth. He shouldn't keep thinking like this, like all was lost. Sure, he had 9 days left, less than 216 hours. But he could do this. If not for himself, then for them. He needed to stop with this shit, more for their sake than his. He squirmed in his seat and leaned closer to Phil. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Phil turned to face him. "Sorry, what was that?" "I'm not saying it again." "No, genuinely, Tommy, I didn't hear what you said." "Oh." His face flushed. "I said I'm sorry." Phil's lips thinned into a line. "I'm sorry too, for how I acted this morning." He said back, "I'm going to take Techno's advice with all this and give you time to explain yourself. I want to help you, Tommy. I really do. But I can't do that if you keep it all to yourself." His heart both warmed and constricted. "What if that's the only way I get through this?" he mumbled, timidly, as he fiddled with his hands. "By keeping it to myself so it doesn't prolong the pain." Phil sighed. "You're too selfless for your own good." Tommy froze. He had never been called selfless before. Only inconsiderate and self-centered. Am I still grounded? You're not getting out of that one. Damn it. Tommy whined, causing Phil to snort. Tommy relaxed into his seat, relief flowing through him. Maybe his self-made problems with this family would be resolved by the end of today, then. As they arrived at the fencing studio, Tommy and Techno separated from the others to go into the changing rooms. Tommy prepared the protective gear for Techno as he got changed. "You doing all right?" he asked as he zipped up Techno's foil lame jacket for him. "Why wouldn't I be? You shaking?" Techno shoved the gloves onto his hands. "You have no proof of that. You're trying to lie to an inaccurately labeled pathological liar." Tommy rolled his eyes and placed Techno's saber into his hands. "You've got this, man." Such encouraging words from a liar. Tommy laughed as he shook his head. "First of all, I said inaccurately labeled. And second, you know what I mean." "Yeah, I do." Techno gripped onto his saber's handle and breathed out evenly. "You're right. I got this." Tommy noticed his still hesitant tone. "No matter the number of matches you win or lose, you're still the blade." Cringe. "I'm trying to be nice to you," he exclaimed. "Alright, fuck you. If you lose your flawless streak in this tournament, I'm selling Steve. Don't touch my polar bear. Then win." He pushed Techno forward through the doors and into the tournament arena. 8 other fencers sat on the waiting bench for the raised piece to be connected to the electrical devices attached to each fencer's saber and foil lame jacket. It was a small tournament, since Techno's division was high, and Snowchester wasn't exactly the biggest town out there. He patted Techno on the back and saluted before joining the others on the audience stands. He didn't know where Nikki got popcorn from, but he still accepted her offerings of it, despite how it was toffee, the worst and inferior flavor, especially when salted existed. "Is he nervous?" she asked him as she handed him another packet of popcorn. "Fucking terrified," he muttered back. He hides it well. "He's got this in the bag," Nikki assured, and Tommy nodded. "Do you have any idea how fencing tournaments work?" "Not a clue. The last time I attended one was in late 1700s France." "You did fencing?" "It was either that or joining the French Revolution. I don't follow people named after a type of ice cream." Tommy didn't expand on that, even with the confused look Nikki gave him. One of the referees began to write the order of matches onto the board. Even though each bout lasted at a maximum of 9 minutes, seeing that many matches noted on the board made Tommy yawn on the spot. Technoblade's name was littered across the board, so at least he had breaks in between. Each fencer went against each other once, and if they won that match, they continued on to semifinals, and then the finals. Tommy went through at least 4 bags of popcorn before Techno's first match. He was glad Nikki only shared her snacks with him, and not Wilbur, because the prick would have eaten everything. Phil kept glaring at them whenever Nikki hid her food after he asked if they could share any of it. "Go on, Technoblade!" he hollered as soon as Techno stepped up to his end of the raised piece, effectively embarrassing him. Nikki giggled beside him, and whooped as well. He bet Techno's face was red under that mask. The referee quieted the audience, meaning Tommy, and continued. "Pray. Allez." Techno, being the tough piece of shit he was, chose the attacker position and promptly smacked the hell out of his opponent with the blade a second after the referee's call-out. It was honestly embarrassing for the guy. If Tommy didn't enjoy watching people get humiliated by Techno, then he would have felt a bit bad for the lad. It was 1 point to Techno, 0 to the other, first to 15. Then, with more humiliating acts, the minute break was called, as Techno had 8 points over his opponent, who only had 2. Techno rushed over to the audience stands, mask in hand. "Tommy, if you shout one more time when I win a point, I will throw for content. If you lose your streak, you lose Steve," he retorted. Techno groaned loudly and returned to the piece. A hand rested on his left shoulder. It was Wilbur. "I'm going to put our differences aside. You're manipulating Techno as Steve, so I forgive you." Tommy scowled at him and flicked his hand off his shoulder. "My apologies were sarcastic, and you were the one being an asshole to me first." "Fine. I'm sorry," Wilbur said. Tommy rolled his eyes. "Okay. I'm really sorry I made a big deal out of you snapping at me last night." "Thank you. Now fuck off again. The round is about to start." Wilbur sighed and sat back in his seat. At least they were getting somewhere today. Whether Tommy's stubbornness contributed to the delay in this. He didn't like apologies to begin with, but apologies in the middle of a fencing tournament just seemed cheap. But it was Wilbur, after all, and the man practically bought everything off eBay. Regardless, the match resumed, and swiftly ended with Techno's final hit slapping the opponent right in the middle of their mask. Techno won, and continued winning. Without losing his streak, he qualified for the finals. His last match, to determine his placement in the entire tournament, was against a fencer called Squid Kid. The showdown of names that shouldn't be legally printed on a birth certificate. Apparently, the two were rivals, and their rivalry had something to do with potatoes before fencing got involved. Don't ask Tommy what this meant. It was more Wilbur spewing random shit to him, as the two fencers prepared themselves at the on-guard line. Either way, the two had history. As the referee called in the round, Techno took the attacking position once again, having the right of way, though Squid parried all his attacks, still failing to proceed to a riposte It was obvious it messed with Techno. He wasn't used to people defending themselves head-on whilst he was in the attacking position. The other fencers at least backed away 2 steps. Before he knew it, Squid defended with a circular parry, deflecting Techno's blade, and finally succeeded with his riposte, hitting Techno square in the jaw. It may have been bad sportsmanship, but nothing could have stopped Tommy from booing the guy literally named after a useless sea animal. Well, besides the referee, who glared at him until he shut up. I regret ever making a song about squids now, Wilbur said, bitter, when Squid landed another hit on Techno, the score being 2-0 in favor of Squid. Tommy decided to disregard whatever that meant, and stuffed his mouth with popcorn to stop himself from cussing out Squid again. Techno corrected his stance as the referee counted them back in and attacked low outside, closer to Squid's waist. He blocked Squid's upcoming attack towards his side and lunged forward, his foot just centimeters behind the center line, and slashed his blade across the left arm, awarding himself a point. This back and forth of each adding points to their scores continued between the two of them until Squid reached 8 points and the minute break started. Like before, Techno walked over to the audience stands, this time slower and dejected. Phil patted him on the shoulder reassuringly. Techno's face was red and sweaty. His hands were shaking. Fuck him up, Techno, Tommy said, glaring at Squid, who was passively sipping on his water, unbothered by the tight scoreboard. Go full on the art of war on his ass. Techno's lips twitched. The art of war, you say? Psychological warfare and all that unethical stuff. Mentally fuck with him. He knows you lead with the attack in position, psych him out, Tommy advised. Good plan. He agreed, a little bit more life in his appearance. Mess him up for his tech, Wilbur added, and the minute break ended. Tommy made sure to flip Squid off before the round began again. Did you just encourage Techno to follow an ancient Chinese military treatise for a fencing tournament? Nikki asked. It's an appropriate time for Sun Tzu. When the round was counted in, Techno did what Tommy said and took the defense position, causing Squid to stagger on his feet for a moment. His confusion obvious. Though his opponent quickly recovered and adopted an attacking position. Squid attacked high outside, with his saber aimed between Techno's weapon and shoulder. Techno's blade slid along the opponent's, blocking the attack, and stepped backwards, almost inviting Squid to have another opening. He staggered on his feet again, though when he lunged, his back foot moved first. The buzzer sounded, indicating a penalty for foot faults, awarding Techno a point. Tommy cheered and discreetly flipped Squid off again, even though the twat wouldn't see it. It was the thought that counted. And as long as the referee didn't notice, it was a harmless action. The match resumed, and Techno switched it up, taking the attacking position, and pounced forward. His saber attacking high inside until Squid retreated backwards. The quickness of Techno's movement interfered with his footwork again, causing Squid to fall off the raised piston. Another point was awarded to Techno, 8-8. Techno continued to psych out his opponent, changing between his attacking positions and taunting Squid to the point where his frustration created openings for Techno to exploit. Even though Techno still lost points to Squid with some of his defensive stance rounds, it was messing with him. His plan was succeeding. Eventually, the score was 14-14, with a barrage needed, a fight-off to determine the tie. For the final time, the referee called out, Prêt. Allez! Within seconds, Techno backed up, allowing Squid to take the attack, and re-engaged his opponent's blade by passing under it. He plunged forward, striking Squid straight in the jaw, the same place he first hit Techno during this match before his foot touched the ground. The fencing studio erupted in noise. Techno didn't lose his streak, he fucking won. Phil clapped the loudest, whilst Tommy hollered his praise with Nicky repeating his phrases. Wilbur whistled and shouted, "That's my brother!" "I am not related to that man," Techno yelled back. A wide grin plastered on his face as he accepted one of the medals. "You're legally related to me, dickhead!" Techno left that tournament with an unbroken streak, 4 medals hung around his neck, and a trophy in his hands. And Tommy couldn't be any prouder. In true British culture, the place of celebration for Techno was the local Weatherspoons, despite the fucker being American. As Phil ordered drinks and food, and everyone congratulated Techno, who absorbed all the praise and clout he could get, Wilbur harassed the music player with his queue of songs he wanted to play. Nicky had to stop him from kicking the machine when it lagged after his 20th request. Phil brought over a tray of drinks, including 1 Coke for Tommy and a single vodka and lemonade for Techno, who immediately refused it. "I'm not 21, I can't drink that." "Mate, you're not in America. The laws are different here." "Just say you're a pussy who can't handle his alcohol." Tommy snarked, taking the paper straw out of his Coke. "Like you can talk," Wilbur quipped back. "Shut up, that was one time, and we will never let it go." The 3 of them nodded, whilst Nicky sighed at them. At least she had his back. Regardless, Techno tactically drank his drink when the ice had diluted the vodka enough, which was, like he said, pussy behavior. When he finished his drink, Tommy listened to every single word that came out of Techno's mouth as he ranted about how dogshit the other opponents were. Techno then attempted to find information about Squid Kid by stalking his Facebook page. Phil had to take his phone away from him to stop the invasion of privacy. Even though they were in a rowdy pub on a Monday evening, Tommy was enjoying himself. The songs he stole from Wilbur's radio were playing on the music player. Phil had allowed him to have a chocolate dessert, despite the price being a bit too expensive. And Ronbu kept sending Tommy videos of Tubbo tripping over himself when failing to skateboard. He couldn't help but look down at his tattoo. The bliss faded for a moment. Someone kicked his shin under the table, and Nicky shook her head. "Have fun, Tommy," she said. "Don't think about that." He nodded and pulled down his sleeve, hoping for the tattoo to not sting throughout the rest of the night. He didn't want a dream visit to ruin this day for him. "I need to talk to you about it soon," he said. He needed help with going through the fact files of Greek myths Ronbu had researched for him. "You decide when. I'm here for whatever you need." She smiled at him and resumed her conversation with Phil. As the night went on, Wilbur approached the bar for the 5th time in the last half an hour, ordering himself another drink. Tommy narrowed his eyes at the shot tray Wilbur had in front of him, which he didn't take back to the table. He remained sat at the bar, alone. Techno shoved at his shoulder. "You all right with him drinking?" Tommy bit on his cheek and continued to stare at Wilbur, who downed one of the shots. "Yeah, I'm fine." He wasn't. But is he? Wilbur glared down at the empty glasses on the tray. "I think him being off with you earlier was more of a cover-up," Techno suggested. "He's got something else going on." Tommy sighed and turned to Techno, who still had his gold medals around his neck. "Sorry, this is supposed to be about you, and I'm making you discuss Wilbur's decline in mental health. You just won your fencing tournament. Enough of this sad shit." Techno shrugged. "As much as I reject the family dynamic, we have to be there for him. Even when I should be celebrating my own growing clout." "Family dynamic?" Tommy repeated. "Am I a part of this family?" The tips of Techno's ears reddened. "I hate this." He grumbled and ruffled his own hair so it covered his ears. Tommy clapped his hand over Techno's shoulder. Aw, Technoblade, he teased, prolonging his name. Techno thumped his head on the table and kept his head resting on the wood. Tommy caught Wilbur ordering more drinks out of the corner of his eye and shouted over the noise, "Wilbur, come join me on bullying the blade." Wilbur abandoned the bartender, a grin sprouting on his face, and stumbled over to them. "That's an idea I can get behind," he said. His words slightly slurred. Wilbur leaned into Tommy's side as he attempted to stand up straight. Sure, the smell of the Jaeger bomb he just downed unnerved Tommy, but he put it aside for Wilbur's sake. He poured a glass of water and forced it into Wilbur's hand. "Drink this and you can help me bother Techno. I can't believe you're solving alcoholism with bullying," Techno said, still resting on the table. Wilbur laughed, and Tommy lifted the glass to Wilbur's mouth. "You can only laugh at his pain if you drink this." He laughed harder, and did so, then leaned down onto Techno, pressing him more onto the table. "Get off of me," Techno declared, trying to move Wilbur off his back. Tommy took a picture of the two of them. "Nope. This is torture. No, this is family bonding. Those are synonyms." Techno bashed his head on the table again. Techno shrugged Wilbur off him anyway, and Wilbur returned to Tommy's side. Wilbur stared at him, his eyes dazed and face slackened. The grin he had dimmed as he peered at Tommy, almost as if he were trying to see something that wasn't there. "I need to tell you a secret," Wilbur whispered into his ear. It reminded him of New Year's Eve. "Why is it that every time you get drunk you feel the need to tell me something private about yourself?" Tommy joked, but Wilbur didn't share his amusement. A somber look came across the other's face. Wilbur leaned closer. "I think I'm beginning to understand why you're scared of me." "What?" "When I fall asleep, I no longer see that sad blue ghost. I see someone else." He paused. "I see what he does to you." Dread weighed him down into his seat. Tommy's face paled, his skin chilled. As the words branded themselves onto his skull, he froze. He couldn't open his mouth to speak, or to stop Wilbur from talking. He couldn't do anything but be helpless to what he didn't ever want to hear. Wilbur was talking about his brother, memories of his first life, something he shouldn't remember. "When did you live in a ravine?" Techno tugged Wilbur away from Tommy. "Drink more water, Wilbur, and don't tell Phil about all that or he'll put you in for more therapy." "I'm not imagining things, Tech. This is real. I can feel it." "It's just your dreams, Will." The man opened his mouth to protest. "Drop it." Wilbur tried to shuffle closer to Tommy. He shuddered, his body reduced to a shaking mess. He wanted to leave, to get up and pretend like this never happened, to remain oblivious to the implications of Wilbur's words, and not have to grieve his brother twice. "I promise you, I won't..." Wilbur trailed off, the brown in his eyes resembling the honey that was once in his brother's, before the paranoia tainted it black. "I won't hurt you like he did, Toms." Tommy bit on his tongue until he tasted blood, not letting the whimpers come out. "I don't know what you're talking about," he murmured. His legs shook underneath the table. "Wilbur, go back to Phil at the bar," Techno ordered, though Wilbur stayed still. "Will, move before I make you." Tommy screwed his eyes shut for a moment, his fingernails piercing into his palms as he tried to distract himself from this. Wilbur reluctantly walked off, but not before looking at Tommy again. Confusion, guilt, and something else he couldn't recognize flashed across his face. Techno wiped Tommy's face with his hand. Hey, no tears over him. He didn't even know he was crying. Let's get you sorted out. Techno dragged him by his arm, but he didn't feel control over his legs, or anything for that matter. He was limp in Techno's grip, his head spaced out to the point where he couldn't even think. They ended up in the bathroom, and Techno locked the door. I'm sorry. He blurted out, his bottom lip trembling. I'm sorry. This was supposed to be your night, and I fucking ruined it. His breath hitched into a sob. Techno put his arm around him and pulled Tommy to his chest. His head rested on top of Tommy's, tucking the boy under his chin. He rubbed the younger's back gently with his other hand as Tommy sobbed. He muttered assurances and soft whispers as Tommy's tears dampened his shirt. It's okay, he said, drawing patterns into Tommy's back. A bit cringe, but it's going to be okay. Tommy choked out a laugh before crying harder. Ignore what Wilbur said. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Tommy soaked up his words, wishing for them to be true. He was scared. Scared of what Wilbur was remembering. He didn't want to lose another brother to insanity. He didn't want to be hurt or abandoned again. Not for a second time. Sorry. He hiccuped into Techno's chest. Techno dried Tommy's face with his sleeve. Don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. I don't know what I did to deserve this family. Tommy hugged him tighter. I really don't. I could say the same to you. He brushed through Tommy's curls. Because of you, I can finally see the hype Wilbur caused over wanting a little brother. Tommy buried himself deeper into Techno's side. His touch let him distance himself from the turmoil festering in his head. I'm sure you didn't expect to deal with a crying child in a pub bathroom after winning your fencing tournament. He mumbled into the fabric of Techno's shirt. Techno squeezed his shoulders. I wouldn't have it any other way. Now that was cringe. Oh, shut up, he said, lightheartedly. You better appreciate this hug, 'cause it's the last one I'm ever giving you. I'll force another one out of you someday. You probably will. Techno admitted. Tommy smiled into him.